Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear us okay. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome back for the final episode of Not Stopping Now, this webinar on nature resilience that we organized. And happy Climate Action Week for everyone. We are so happy of taking part of the Climate Action Week that is happening around the country with so many events that we're going to be mentioning after. I am Mariana Coleman. I am Climate Action Officer with the Climate Ambassador Program of Taisce, an initiative that is supported by the Department of Environment, Climate and Communication. And we co-create this webinar in collaboration with the Heritage Council and the Biodiversity Officer Network, a diverse group of wildlife professionals that work within our councils to create local authority biodiversity action plans. And here are represented by the person who co-created this webinar with me, Marina Mulligan, who is Biodiversity Officer for Waterford City and County Council. Marina, say hello. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this event is happening in the framework of the Climate Action Week, which is Ireland's largest pop-up climate festival. We have a lot of things happening every day this week, like, for example, this webinar, but we also have movie screening, swap shops, board game nights, and we will finish with the grand finale, which is on Sunday, Sunday 20th of October at 7:30 p.m. in the Sugar Club in Dublin. That is the Climate Change Cabaret. So if you're interested to take part of the event, it's gonna be good fun, and we're going to learn a little bit about the environment as well. So if you want to join us, I will put all this information in the chat box in a minute. We still have a few places free for you to join. Also, if you want to know more about the Climate Ambassador Program and you want to become a Climate Ambassador for 2025, our application is open now. So I also gonna share that information in the chat box in a minute. You could be part of this amazing and wide group of Climate Ambassadors from all areas and from all backgrounds that are taking action on climate change. And we need everyone. So if you're interested, just join us for next year. Now going back to our webinar. So if you follow us in the previous episodes, or if you don't, doesn't matter. The first episode, we talked with Kate Chandler from the National Biodiversity Data Center, and she explained us about pollinators and the importance of pollinators for biodiversity. The second webinar was about bats with Karen Healy from Bat Conservation Ireland, who explained us about what bats are important, and they're way more than just a Halloween icon. So she helped us to appreciate them a little bit more. And the last episode, the third one, was with John Lusby from Birdwatch Ireland, and he was talking about barn owls and its behavior, and explain also how we can help to grow the population of barn owls in Ireland. So for this final session, we're not going to focus on one specific species, but rather we will talk about the common space and where they live, coexist, and thrive, hopefully. And that's why we're going to be talking about dark skies. And that's why we have Georgia MacMillan, who will, in a minute, start talking about why we need to care about the habitat, and not only as a habitat for these species, but also as a recreational area and what is vital for climate action. Georgia, and this is a long title, works as Mayo Dark Sky Park Development Officer. It's a founder member of the Friends of Mayo Dark Sky Community Group, raising awareness of light pollution through dark skies advocacy, and founder board member of Dark Sky Ireland NGO, which seeks to restore and protect dark skies across Ireland. Many other titles that she's gonna explain in a minute. She's also has a PhD in dark skies, so she will mention that in a minute. And today she's gonna teach us about why dark matters. That's the name of her presentation. One more minute from me. How the organization for the webinar today. So Georgia is going to present her topic until around 1:45. After that, we will start with our Q&A session. For that, it's very important, please check below. You will have a Q&A icon. So at any moment, at any point on the presentation, if you have any question, please click there and put your question. Marina will be in charge of the Q&A after that from 1:45 to 2 p.m., more or less. We will try to answer all your questions. So again, at any point of the presentation, if you have any questions, just put it there, and Marina will administrate that after. The captions are on if you to improve accessibility. And if at any point you miss any information, don't worry. This, as you can notice, this webinar has been recorded, and we will share the video and all the material we can after the presentation, and after also the same than with previous episodes. You can find it in the Climate Ambassador YouTube channel. We will share also the link for that. So with all that said, I hope I don't missing anything. Thank you again for all of you for joining us today. And Georgia, thank you so much for sharing this hour with us. The floor is all yours.
Thanks so much, Mariana and Marina, and congratulations to both of you on this series. I've dipped in and out of the previous talks, so it's a pleasure for me to join the series, and thanks everyone for joining. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen so we can go straight into the presentation. So hopefully that's come up now. So I've called it Dark Matters, and just one thing to say, I don't have a PhD in dark skies yet. I am hopeful and on that journey with the which is funded by the Irish Research Council and with the University of Galway, and it's a research position as an employment-based dark sky officer. So that's my bag, I suppose. So just to put a little bit of context, what I'm going to talk to you about is firstly, why dark skies, what we have in dark skies here, what I'm working on in Mayo, and also, why it's so important, and why it's an interdisciplinary subject that we all should be conscious of for many reasons, which we'll talk about now. And then I'll show some citizen science tools and resources that hopefully will be of interest to you in whatever field you are in. So just to go back on that, the location that I'm based at is Mayo Dark Sky Park, which is the National Park, Wild Nathan National Park in County Mayo in the northwest. So we say half the park is after dark. The park itself by day, the pictures on the right show us the beautiful mountain range of the Nathan Begs, which is mostly Atlantic blanket bog from the top of the mountains right down to the shoreline. And then things don't stop just because the sun goes down. So that's why we've got the message of half the park is after dark, featuring the lovely Clagan boardwalk under the Milky Way over on the left there. And some of the messaging that we've been using really to communicate not just about the national park, but the dark skies and why the two are so intertwined have been very effective. So I've shown these three posters here, which were designed by Tyler Nordgren in the US for a series of national parks in the US. And it was very topical because we twinned with Yosemite National Park in May. So we, rather than just use the slogan of half the park is after dark, we used two parks and one sky, which again uses that message from Dark Skies that the sky has no border. So it's a social message as well as an environmental message. And there are many ways of using Dark Skies to communicate with different audiences. So, which leads me to talk about the sustainability and the different disciplines and the different interests that people may have. So again, as an ambassador and as a climate ambassador, you might be talking to local authorities, you might be talking to people who are interested in the arts and culture or energy or even tourism. And we found with Dark Skies, by it's not just pigeonholing it into one thing. A lot of people assume it's just about astronomy, which it isn't. It's very much about wildlife, biodiversity, very important to our health and our well-being, arts and culture and heritage. If you can think just for a moment of how many amazing pictures we have, how many artworks, Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, some of the music that we listen to, which is influenced by the night sky. And then, of course, things like policymakers and energy and climate action. If you're talking to your local authorities, then dark skies and the reduction in energy is the message that they might want to hear. So it's about adapting your message to the appropriate stakeholder as an ambassador. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the coming slides. So first, we use this a lot at Dark Sky Ireland to explain what do we mean by light pollution, because it's not something that people have come across necessarily. There maybe a little bit more so today, but certainly when we started, there were eyebrows raised when we mentioned light pollution, because we've heard of air pollution, we might have heard of water pollution, but not necessarily how can light be a pollutant? And that's one of the questions we were asked. So it's categorized into several different ways of explaining, depending on the type of light and the conditions. So glare is something that's excessive brightness. So I think this is coming up more and more now with the new headlights that we're seeing in cars, and with the change of our lighting to LEDs, we are finding that some of the lighting is quite harsh to the human eye. Sky glow is that hue that's over the urban cities that you can see from a distance. Reflected light is something that people don't often think about, and this is very important in the Irish context, because we have I suppose we have the weather for rainy nights and therefore often wet streets and wet surfaces. That in itself reflects light, and much of our lighting system is designed for dry climates. So we don't often think about the amount of light that bounces off the pavement and back up into the sky, which adds to light pollution. Obtrusive light is simply, unfortunately, maybe a neighbor who hasn't thought about where they're placing their light, and it might be affecting your property or your own area. And then there's the clutter of, I suppose, a mixture of all different types of light, different colors. Again, a lack of design where lights might be placed together without thinking about the purpose that they're intended to do. So I mentioned the changeover of lighting to LED retrofits, and we welcome that because, especially as climate ambassadors, because LEDs are undoubtedly better in terms of energy efficiency. However, the change to LED at the bluer end of the spectrum, the very white harsh light, might be more energy efficient, but it also scatters far more on the lighting spectrum. So consequently, it doesn't reduce light pollution. In fact, it increases it. And that's shown here in the transition over Dublin City from sodium lighting to LEDs, which you can see that there is quite a blue scatter in the atmosphere. Light also travels considerably. So these two pictures, again, she mentioned the source. The previous one was from Professor Brian Espy, who's our chair of Dark Sky Ireland. And this one, the top photo was taken by Paul Evans. And what it's showing us is not a sunrise or a sunset, but the light pollution from Glasgow as seen from Larne. So, some 80 miles away. So literally light doesn't stop traveling until we put a lid on it. And that's why when we look at the sky and we have a dark sky and we can see starlight, obviously that light has traveled for many, many miles to reach our eye. And it's always such a pity then that we blight it with artificial light that is unnecessary. So just a quick synopsis of light pollution in Ireland and how it's spread over the years. So again, these graphs were provided by Brian Espy. This is looking at Ireland using data collection from sky quality measurements and combined with satellites to create this graph. So what we have here, as you would expect, the urban areas to be the brighter, with the legend down at the bottom shows us that the white is in fact 10 times brighter than a naturally dark sky would be if you look directly overhead. And then you've got the gradient as you move further out into less populated areas, less densely urbanized areas and less infrastructure back in 1997. So that's pretty much as you would expect. The rural periphery areas are as near as we can get to a naturally dark sky looking overhead. If we move on, and the next graph that I have is 2015, the picture has changed considerably. And now what we have done is degraded the natural sky pretty much all over the country, even some places in the far west, the periphery communities no longer have a fully natural night sky. So what that means is we as a species don't use dark adapted vision anymore because we don't need to. We're always using artificial light, but nature doesn't either, and that has an impact on nature as well as ourselves. And what's really happening here is, if you look at the date there, so in 2015, we were already lighting up quite intensely. So in 2015, we're now 2024. Anyone born around 2000 probably hasn't seen a completely natural night sky from where they live in much of the country, certainly near the urban areas. And so, you know, if we don't show young people what a natural night sky is, we can't necessarily encourage them to protect it. And that's where we have this concept of shifting baseline syndrome. We no longer know or recognize what a naturally dark sky should look like. So just to use our Mayo site as a case study, we have the Dark Sky Park, which is depicted here in the black, in among very rural locations, really, but still, even in these rural locations, we have Ballina, Castlebar, and Westport, which have considerably increased the spread of lighting over the years. And what's happened here is we now have almost a barrier, an ecological barrier, in terms of light that we've created. There are very few dark spaces for wildlife in these, I suppose, bright corridors. What has been looked at more recently is dark infrastructure, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, where researchers are starting to look at how we can preserve ecological corridors for nature at night. So in Ireland, we use dusk till dawn lighting. And when you think about that and how long light is on, it's quite considerable. So Mayo alone has 17,000 lamps. In the country, we have about 500 to 600,000 public lights. All of them are on from dusk to dawn. So these are things that are obviously a climate action issue. We are using more energy efficient lighting, but we still need to think about the intensity and where we can improve the light for nature and for our own well-being. This is just an example of the change in Westport from 2020, which is quite recently, to 2023. And these types of maps are accessible on the website above, lightpollutionmap.info. So as I said before, it's not enough really to have a dark sky place. We need to look at areas that are increasing their light and seeing how we can work together. And that's what we're doing in Mayo. We have a working group with our local authority who are very proactive in looking at the type of light that they are installing and working with us to see where can we make the changes that are positive for all the members of the community. So our goal is to create a dark sky reserve as a county. And here what we've tried to do is work with the mapping for SACs and for nature protected areas, SPAs and SACs, and overlay that with the county map of light pollution. So we can see the areas that are intensely lit are quite close to ecologically sensitive areas. And this is going to be part of our baseline study to put in place a policy for how we can mitigate these increases in light. So this, I think I'd like to have a look at some of these illustrations that just give us really, I suppose, simple explanations of how we use light and how it affects nature and different types of nature with different types of light. So we looked at the categories earlier, sky glow, for instance, and how that hides the stars from birds and migratory species who are using it for navigation. Street lights that are on all night, every night, and how that interferes with light sensitive species, aquatic species that are often overlooked with barrier light that shines or is reflected into the water, and ambient light, again, that either attracts, in the case of some bats, not all, but some bats are attracted to light because it's a source of food. Others are repelled by it, and different consequences need to be considered in terms of our dark infrastructure and how we consider that in our planning. So the image has been prepared by a group led by Sordello, and they've done a lot of work in France on this topic, and there's quite a few guidelines actually on dark infrastructure and how we can look at it in our planning procedures. So a few of the common species that we would associate with the night, and I know you've had some great talks on bats and the barn owl, and of course the pollinators. So often when we think about moths being, as people say, drawn to the light, something that's not, there's an awful lot of studies about moths and light, as you well know, I'm sure, but often moths are not so much drawn to the light, but they are keeping artificial light on perhaps one side as they're navigating, and that's why we often see them spiraling into the light. So we assume that they're just drawn to the light, but it's not necessarily the case. And researchers have found that that moths are actually affected by light for quite a distance away. So even though there might be one street light, it might affect their navigation for quite some distance. So there's a lot of studies on this, and obviously if it affects nocturnal pollinators and moths and insects, then it affects the food chains and the whole ecosystem. Here's another few species that are not so commonly associated with the issues, but we have similar problems like the great diving beetle, which is down in the bottom left there, which uses which travels at night to avoid predation, but seeks new habitats through ponds and with light that is reflected off the water surface. And that, again, going back to the reflection on wet and hard surfaces, that they're often misdirected to streets instead of ponds. We've research coming out on spiders and how they navigate, and also even papers in Australia about the brain size of spiders shrinking in urban areas where they're affected by excess light. Then we have the mayfly and the impact of bridge lighting and where they lay their eggs, and how their dispersal is attracted to, again, lit and hard shiny surfaces rather than water surfaces. And trees that are budding either more frequently or at different times, again, where they're immediately affected by artificial light. And then silver eels, which migrate on dark moon nights, so no new moons at, I suppose, this time of year, are now affected by water barriers created by light shining into the water. So I've used a couple of man-made, I suppose, beams of light just to illustrate how we are controlling the night and the night as a habitat, because that's what it is for much of nocturnal wildlife and for migratory species. So I've used the picture on the right, which some of you may have seen. I was recently visiting Iceland, and from I think it's the 9th of October right through to December, the light on the right is switched on. Now, it's a really nice sentiment. It's in memory of John Lennon, but I mean it's a kind of an irony, really, where you've got the natural beauty of the Northern Lights behind it. The picture on the left shows us the Las Vegas, I suppose probably the brightest city in the world, and the light from the Luxor which, as you can see there, is attracting birds, bats, all sorts of species into its light dome. So again, something that we think may be pretty or maybe attractive has significant consequences. And I would argue as to how attractive it is anyway. These are some of the impacts on tall buildings. This picture is from Washington, D.C. Some time ago, but there's also a lot of work done in Toronto, in Canada, on migratory birds, and the FLAP program, the Fatal Light Awareness program, I think it's called, where birds are just crashing into buildings. And this is hundreds, if not thousands, of birds that are affected. So just simple measures can change this, like switching the lights off at night when nobody's in the buildings, because quite often that is the case. The lights are left on in tall buildings. And this, as a resource, I thought this might be useful. The IUCN Red List has a search filter on it. So I just did a quick filter on Ireland and threats as light pollution. And here we have 11 species that have come up. So what we are seeing now is that light pollution is entering into our dialogue, and obviously it is recognized as a threat, not just an emerging issue to consider. Little picture here just to show you the impact of different color lights, which is really important. So the light on the right has far more of the blue, the white spectrum that I was talking about earlier. And if I just play this for a few seconds, that's all we need. You can see how insects are drawn to that light rather than the warmer light. So from a human point of view, there's very little difference, but from nature and wildlife, it does make a difference. So if we can think about using warmer color light, it would be less of an impact. And this is the lighting spectrum. So just to illustrate that, so in terms of our species, the human species, our circadian sensitivity. So we wake up when the day is bright in the mornings normally, and that aligns with some of the new street lights with the LEDs that are quite blue. So if the two are coincided, then we're going to be more alert and awake. Whereas if we think about changing our lighting and moving our lighting so that it's more in the yellower part of the spectrum, then it's not going to interfere with our own circadian sensitivity. And there's lots of issues, human health issues, that are emerging now to really force us to consider that and to think about how much light we need and what color light we need in our lives. So I'll zip over that one. That's really just illustrating the different types of LEDs, the warm Kelvin, if you are looking at lighting, and if you can think about the color temperature of 2700 Kelvin, that is your sort of warm light, and that's a good benchmark because that strips out most, not all, but most of the blue rich content. With Dark Sky Ireland, when we were doing some consultation for our strategic plan, I thought this was an interesting slide to show you, because from the workshop attendees, which came from a number of different backgrounds, we asked the question, what was important and what dark skies really meant to the audience. And yes, astronomy came out strongly there, but so too did protecting biodiversity and health. So these are, key themes that I think is changing the discussion and the narrative behind why we need to think about light and why we need to rethink it in our world. So what we're doing at Dark Sky Ireland is trying to put together a policy in terms of advisory notes, and we have quite a lot of resources on our website, darksky.ie. We have, over the years, Dark Sky Ireland grew from a national network. We've obviously supported the Dark Sky International Places in Ireland. We've also produced a strategic plan, which is available online. And now we are planning for an event which will take place roughly this time next year, the end of October, called Alan, Artificial Light at Night 2025. And that will bring together the science behind light pollution and artificial light at night from ecologists to astrophysicists and scientists who are working on measurements, as well as social scientists. And we will have a 3-day conference in Westport. So if you can put that in the diary and perhaps join us, I think it would be great to have those discussions across multiple disciplines. So one of the main issues that we are tackling at the moment is obviously legislation and policy. We don't have anything in Ireland at the moment that is of a national scale. There are other countries that have at least, well, some of them have done quite a lot of work. So France, for instance, would have quite a strong legislative policy on light pollution. Other countries have adapted existing legislation and put something in place. So the map on the left is put together by Jana Jakushina, who is a researcher in Belgium and a lawyer, and is also currently doing her PhD on light pollution laws. So we really need to think about, how we can adapt perhaps existing legislation, and also what's coming in to our, I suppose, our action plans for the future. So the nature restoration law now recognises light pollution, and that by itself means that we have to start thinking about where we can make changes as a result of that, and ultimately work towards policy. These are a few resources, a few useful documents. What I've put in here is the National Biodiversity Plan from France, which was published in January, and which is very prescriptive on goals for tackling light pollution. This document here, the European Commission produced, Future Brief, which has a lot of mitigation measures for environmental protection against light pollution. So it has ideas for and guidance on architectural lighting or bridge lighting and urban area lighting. And some of the advice notes that have come out since the light pollution meetings in the Czech Republic and in Spain in recent years. And also the IUCN's report, The World at Night, which was out at the end of last year, which also contains a lot of researchers and prominent researchers in the area of dark skies. So measuring dark skies, there are lots of ways that you can get communities involved, and I think some of them are really good fun. This one, called The Globe at Night, is where you can get people out looking at the stars on a clear night and counting stars within a constellation and reporting their observations to the Globe at Night. So I can share the links afterwards, but you can look it up very easily. What they do is they pick a constellation. So at the moment they're looking at Cygnus, which is pretty much straight overhead. And they're describing how dark was the night and matching it up to different pictures with a number of stars in the sky. This tool, called Nightlights or Nachtlichter, was developed by Christopher Kaiber's team in Germany, and we are going to be using this ourselves. We've taken part in the pilot, but Dark Sky Ireland will be sharing this probably early next year. For people to take part in counting light. And I can't tell you how important this is, apart from just taking records of how dark our skies are. Really knowing how much light we're using on the ground is important, because we know our public street lightings through databases, but we really don't know how much light is coming into our world from residential, from commercial premises. And that's the point of this, really, is to get a handle on this from a citizen science point of view. It's a 20-minute tutorial, and then it asks people to literally walk a short transect at night and log what type of light they see and where. These are a few instruments that we're experimenting with in Mayo at the moment. This one on the right is well known. It's a Canadian measurement tool where you take a reading of how dark the sky is overhead. And the ones on the left are meters that are developed by the University in Madrid, and are very, I suppose, very good for recording the data. The Canadian one needs citizen science to manually record, whereas the Spanish data does it automatically, and I'll show you some of the outputs from that. But there are also they do need power and they do need Wi-Fi, whereas the Canadian one can be done in very remote places. So these are some of the outputs from the Spanish meters, where we have like a photometer of the sky overhead. So I think this is one of the nights where we had some aurora in there. So you'll see the brighter sky overhead from the aurora, and then some lights from nearby towns and villages. It's really quite effective. I can't pass this by without mentioning the actions that we can take on pollinators, and you've had a talk on pollinators already, but we have a how-to guide that we worked on with the All Island Pollinator Plan to develop things like moon gardens and pollinators, flowers that are pollinator friendly for nocturnal species. And I suppose just some of the simple things that you can do to reduce light pollution is to just check your own lighting. If everybody did this at home, then that would make quite a big difference, just to see, is it angled down? Is it on only when we need it? Have we chosen warmer rather than blue, glary tones? And can we put timers on? Is there a few of the not so friendly lights? So if you can avoid these, that would be really cool. Unfortunately, builders tend to love this one down here, the bulkhead, and these ones on the side of every new house that we see, and the round ones. But unfortunately, the light just diffuses everywhere, so they are not so dark friendly. And the new, I suppose, fashion for lighting up the runway of our garden paths with these little fellas. So again, if we could try and avoid that, that would be great, or at least only use them when we really need them. And here's a few lights that are reasonably okay. The idea with lighting is to see the effect and not the source of the light. So you don't really want to be looking at a light bulb. So that's why this one is the front sort of porch light is hiding the actual light itself. But you do see the effect, and that's the point. You want to use light for purpose and for task lighting, not just to admire the light bulb. And a couple of quick slides. I'm nearly done now. So just a couple of quick slides from Dark Source, which is Kerem Masfurulu, and the work that he's done on showing, how we can make very simple changes in, say, the commercial areas like factories for reducing our sky glow and the sky impact that we have. So this is a how not to light factory, and making a few changes like pointing lights down, changing the color, etc., having them on where necessary, and using blinds on big buildings rather than just letting light shine out from inside. This is our little case study in County Mayo, which we've been promoting quite a lot, and it has attracted a lot of attention just as a template really for how we can make small changes. So we had light that wasn't so dark sky friendly. Exactly what we don't want to see is, great big floodlights pointing straight out rather than down. And they're not really showing the building in its finest light, so to speak, anyway. Using a bit of design from Dark Source, again, in this case, rethinks it and considers it a little bit more, I suppose, sensitively for the building as well as those that are visiting it at night. And these are the results. So a few simple changes, a design, excuse me, and we have quite an effective and enjoyable site to visit at night. These are a few more of the pictures using, again, we had a little projector. We cheated here to project the stained glass window onto the ground level there at night. Excuse me. So a few books that are of interest. If you wanted to do any further reading, there's two new ones out which I haven't read yet, Night Magic and Dark Skies. Anna Levin is going to be joining us in Mayo for our Dark Sky Festival. And Leanne Henian, excuse me, will be online at the International Dark Sky Association conference at the end, early November. I'm just going to take a little drink here. And two other really cool books. I can't recommend the Darkness Manifesto enough by Johan Eklof, and All Through the Night by Danny Robertson. They're really super if you want to get a good understanding of why dark skies is important and why we need to rethink our lighting. And fortunately, just to conclude, so, to think about light pollution as a recognized environmental stressor, there's a huge amount of research out there now. So we are evidence-based. We need to urgently re-engineer how we use light from the ecological perspective. Consider LEDs. Yes, they're energy efficient, but also make sure that we consider the biodiversity stresses that they add and use appropriate lighting. And I suppose really the most important point on here is to consider a holistic approach. So work with designers, work with ecologists, work with planners, and all members of the community to get the right approach, because we are not anti-light. We're just saying, let's do this the right way. And finally, as we like to say in Dark Skies, what if we could fix all pollutants with the flick of a switch? Well, this is one where we really can, if we think about it. And lastly, I'll just leave you with one of my favorite slides. I'm sure lots of you recognize this shaft of light and the little dot in the middle of it. So in 1990, the Voyager 1 spacecraft took this photograph, and Carl Sagan, the prominent astronomer at the time, wrote a lovely piece about it, but just a small extract. It really sums up why it's so important. Look again at that dot. That's home, that's here, that's us. And on it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of lived out their lives. And if we didn't have enough reasons to protect our pale blue dot, I think that is one of them. So with that, I will end the presentation. And thank you very much for bearing with me to all the frog throats there.
Thanks a million, Georgia. I'll give you a little bit of a break while I thank you for that talk, so you can take a sip of water. It was fantastic to be joined today by yourself. That presentation gave us a really comprehensive overview, actually, in a very short space of time, things from wildlife to light pollution. And I know yourself, we go back a number of years on the dark sky front, and delighted to be welcomed into the fold on that as well. There's a few questions popping up, and feel free to put your questions into the chat. I'm going to pick out from there now in a second. But just as a conservation biologist myself, just to kind of kickstart this, we know the IUCN, or the International Union for Conservation of Nature, has really highlighted the importance of dark skies in terms of wildlife, looking at circadian rhythms, but also looking at vision and how we don't really consider any vision other than our own when we come to lighting. So on that note, I just wanted to ask you, if people did want to check out the night sky and the importance of a naturally dark sky, do you have any apps or websites that you would recommend that people can bring out just on the back of the Aurora, I think, pretty much, and along with Comet A3 this week as well? Oh, I don't have your sound there.
Sorry. No, really good point, Marina. Thanks. Yeah, I use a few different ones, but one of the free apps is called Stellarium. So you can either use it as a web-based or download it on your phone. There's also one I use called Sky Safari. I think there might be a small charge with that. There's also ones called Heavens Above, which will help you find if there's meteor showers or satellites. Some people like to track the ISS. I'm not so keen on tracking the Starlink ones because there's just too many of them. But yeah, that's really helpful as well. And In the Sky is another one. In the Sky with a hyphen in between all the words. It's really cool.
Brilliant, thank you. And yeah, case study wise, so you looked at Newport and took the Dark Sky Park in Mayo as an example. We've got very little non-light polluted areas left, I guess, in the country. How do people go about getting kind of a designation for kind of a dark sky park or something similar?
Yeah, if you have a look at, now we do have some resources on Dark Sky Ireland about that. We have like a step-by-step guide, but also the accrediting authority is Dark Sky International. So it's darksky.org, I think, is their website. And they have a step-by-step guide. So it depends firstly on where you are and what type of accreditation you're looking at. Ours is a dark sky park, which works because it is the national park and it's all one owned land. There are also communities, dark sky communities, where the community has an agreement to manage the lighting with the municipality or the local authority. And there are reserves, which are a combination of policy and a core protected zone. So there's different types. It usually takes about 2 years to put the light pollution measurements together, the lighting audit, and the engagement. And I have to caution and just say that's the start of it. That's not the end of it. So it's a long journey.
I think there was a lot of work put into that Dark Sky Park in Mayo, and you kick-started it, of course. Worth mentioning as well that Georgia is a dark sky defender under the International Dark Sky Association, which is a huge...
somewhere.
Yeah, there you go. That's perfect. No, you're absolutely the right person. The communities aspect is really interesting, and I think we've spoken about it quite a lot in terms of actions that people can take just in the end of your presentation there and where they can get those resources. But I have some nice questions in here. Kathleen McMahon has asked, are there any guidelines available for organising a lights out night in my town?
You know, it's really hard. We haven't done it in Ireland. I don't think anywhere has done a lights out night in terms of public lighting.
Yeah.
And it depends, like the local authority, I think, would do it, but you do have to think about the businesses, and it's quite a sensitive topic in Ireland. We're one of the few countries that has no park night lighting at all in our public lighting. So even in the UK, and you know, obviously they don't get much right in a lot of things, but they do have some areas where they have park night lighting. And I think once you have that, then people are a little bit familiar with, you know, lights being off from say 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. But it's quite prominent in Europe. So in Holland and Belgium and Germany, they do have lights out nights, and they're very successful. They're really cool. So I think, you know, if anyone can get that off the ground, full kudos. It would be great. We just
totally start small and then work our way up. I remember hearing before the Brecon Beacons National Park has a really great set of communities that kind of run around it. And they definitely look at things like curfews or night lights out nights and similar.
And I think actually in Scotland, I forget the name of the town now, but I think they've got something like 2 weeks. You know, that would be overboard, but it's 2 weeks in January where they have lights out, and they have different sorts of festivals, and there's lots that can be done, you know, if you pick the right area and just get a little bit creative with it. But it doesn't have to be all lights out. You could, you know, just tone it down for a night, and you'd be amazed at what a difference that can make.
I'd say you could even start with a little street party if you do have a local community that are really interested. The residents might get involved. Another question here as well, Kieran Warden. He said he lives in Furbo, 20 minutes west of Galway City, where the sky is quite dark. However, Furbo is starting to get more built up, and there doesn't seem to be any consideration for correct lighting. And what would be the best way to alert the council about this and to get people on board to tackle this and keep our sky as dark as possible? I'll start off and then I'll pass over to you. I think just first, Kieran, there, getting in touch with your biodiversity officer in your local council is a really good start. There's lots of biodiversity action plans happening at the moment. Consultations are open for those. And also kind of we're linking in with Dark Sky Ireland, NPWS, the National Parks and Wildlife, and other advice that we can get on lighting. So if you do want to input it there, that's great. Georgia, I'll pass over for you to any Mayo related conversations you may have had over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. Especially we're so lucky now to have so many biodiversity officers coming on board, and we have a new one in Mayo too. So linking in with different people who have a similar interest. So whether it's doing maybe a bat walk or something, you know, just linking in with different fields so that you're not alone in your community, and maybe have a stargazing night or something. You have to establish that it's of value to the community as well. So it might, you're not just the Lone Ranger, and involve other facets in it, and then just speak to the council, because I'm sure maybe through the biodiversity officer, but I'm sure that they would be amenable to listening. Everyone wants to get things better if they can.
Yeah, and I think actually just on that, I think most councils have now moved to the 2700 Kelvin for any new lighting. we are aware that there's still a lot to be done on work, but just remembering as well that a lot of these lighting schemes are on a 10-year cycle. And so if you get your information in early and you get your kind of backing from the local community and things like that, the conversation can be opened, which is a really nice way to go. On the wildlife front, so I have some of the incredible facts you touched on, things that we think insects are attracted to light, but actually they're turning their backs to it all the time. I think that's just a fascinating subject. And just looking at kind of the IUCN guidance there, I know you're working alongside the national parks on your PhD. So looking at where night skies meets tourism and wildlife. Can you give us a little bit of information on your PhD work on the ecotourism end of night skies?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so I've been doing data collection through walking in the dark every week through the last couple of winters. So, and I've been interviewing people as we walk in the dark. So it's a safe route. It's always, do a risk assessment and check that out. But we have a 2-kilometer looped walk, and we just go out on a Friday night, and I take when I was interviewing for people for the PhD, I was taking different sets of people. So those from a tourism background or an agricultural background or a policy background. And just, I have obviously a series of questions about their interpretation of darkness and the experience of darkness. And it's quite surprising really how true darkness isn't that dark. That's partly because your eyes are adapted. When we're in urban areas and we go from a brightly lit street to a dark place, it's suddenly pitch black, and that's because the adjustment hasn't happened. But being in a really dark place, you have moonlight, you have starlight, so it's quite insightful really to talk to people and listen and experience not just what we see in the sky, but what we see around us, what we hear, what we sense as we're walking in the dark. And it's just something, it's so important. I'd really recommend it to everyone to make sure that you go to a dark sky place at some point and just experience it. It's not as scary as we first think.
No, absolutely not. It's actually really quite magical when you get into one of those dark sky spots. I remember my first time really getting like that full flow of like Milky Way overhead and thousands of stars. And that doesn't leave you. And like you're saying, I think when I remember like light pollution versus a dark sky place, and you talking about the dark sky being brighter, it's something that everyone can check really easily. If you're in an area that's quite lit and there's clouds overhead, you'll get that white cloud with a very dark background to it. First thing that struck me when I walked out in a dark sky park was actually the clouds were dark and the night sky behind it was just mind-blowing.
That's a big difference, that the clouds being dark, because I never mentioned that earlier, but you're dead right. The light reflects off, because it's the water in the clouds, the light reflects, and sometimes up to 700 times it bounces up and down, and that creates extra sky glow. But when we have that real darkness, it's sealed by clouds. It's quite different. And you mentioned tourism, and why people might come to these places is because they never have that respite. So that's what we're finding in terms of tourism, that firstly, it's an off-season initiative, so it benefits the local communities. And there are lots of partnerships that you can do with B&Bs and hotels to get them involved, and guides, etc. But then also doing nature walks. So it's not just the astronomy part, it's the darkness, and it's the reconnecting with nature, I would say.
Yeah, I think that reconnection is so important, because if you go back centuries, sure, anyone ahead of us culturally and traditional ecological knowledge as well was all based around these kind of natural processes, naturally dark skies. If we look at the heritage aspect, which I'm sure you're doing on the ecotourism side, most of our heritage structures are orientated with the night sky.
We used it as a clock, as an indicator for farming, and the stories at night, and the visits, etc. So
yeah. And if you ever do get yourself up to Mayo, there is some fantastic night walks you can get involved in through the national park as well, which I would highly recommend. But I know Dark Sky Ireland do hop out to different communities across the country. And so if you do want any of those type of talks, you can reach out as well. This talk has been really nice to kind of envelop the previous three that we've spoken about, things like pollinators, bats, and barn owls, all of which rely on night skies. And I just thought if there's anything really simple that someone could do when they go home this evening, what would be your recommendations of, like, let's say your top three things that you can change quickly?
I do a little home audit. So, just check, have you, is there something you could do, like putting in blinds or changing the timing on your outside lighting, and then just go out in the garden and have a look and, start doing some measurements. It's really helpful to us if we know a little bit more about how dark each areas are. So maybe looking at some of the citizen science options that we have, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, it really would. And I think the kind of fascination as well with night skies is growing. I think there hasn't been a paper this week that has not mentioned the aurora or the comet.
Yeah, and I didn't mention it once, so I was
yeah, there you go, and now's the time.
But no, you're so right. I mean, the contrast, that was another thing that, I noticed the contrast in the images that came up, and I think somebody's put a comment there about the difference, show the difference it made to have little or no artificial light nearby. Yeah, so you're in a really privileged area if you could see the aurora properly with the naked eye, compared to just that faint hue. So yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, I think actually those lights out nights that were mentioned previously, if we knew the forecast coming along, it's a really great opportunity for villages even to get involved in those kind of lights out nights and really, really enjoying what's happening overhead. So just on your own work on the tourism front, I know you have been working quite heavily across the years on Dark Sky Festival in Mayo. What kind of people get involved with Dark Skies? Do you have to be an expert, or where do you come from?
No. I mean, I'm no expert still. I mean, I'm learning all the time. No. I mean, I got involved because I was interested in outdoor education and I suppose tourism, taking groups on hiking tours, etc., and just enjoying the night myself. But people get involved for all different reasons. It might be that they are, a lot of the people who work on bat conservation, for instance, are interested in the night skies, and people who are in, say, tidy towns. It's community members who are active in the community are interested in this as well, because it benefits business, it benefits the town. It looks prettier. I mean, when you see adverts for visiting places, you never see, light pollution everywhere. Towns and villages at night are sort of that Hugo warm candlelight to attract people to come and visit. They don't show you light pollution. So, we want our places to look more attractive with better lighting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, where it kind of spans all types of people, whether it's local communities or councils or businesses. The tourism side of things, obviously wildlife benefits at the end of all of this as well, because they're seeing in either UV vision that we have no real concept of what that light looks like to them. And the reflections which you spoke about off the water, especially freshwater and marine coastal areas, we don't really think about the effect of those lights coming off a cliff face on the cliff nesting birds, or coming off like a shoreline, and how that may affect fish. I know fish sometimes can head towards the light and they bring all their predators with them, and the whole ecosystem moves towards a very shallow area, which is not the safe spot to be if you're trying not to get predated.
Okay.
And just to wrap up, if there is any kind of recommendations of places where people can get involved, your website, for example, or following you on Instagram, whereabouts do we find you?
Well, you can find us on at Mayo.skies or at Dark Sky Ireland, on pretty much most platforms. We have a YouTube channel actually, which has a lot of different talks. We've invited guest speakers who did Women in Dark Skies. Some of the women who spoke actually were excellent on different themes that we've covered here today. And mayo.skypark.ie and Dark Sky Ireland, darksky.ie. And yeah, if we can help, there's lots of resources on those websites. And if you're looking at your own area from light pollution point of view, the map, lightpollutionmap.info, is a very good resource to see the changes over time in lighting.
Yeah, they're all fantastic resources, and someone has asked where they could find them. We'll make sure to send the links out in the follow-up email. So any links that you've mentioned there, we'll make sure to pop those in. I'm going to wrap this up and bring it to the end. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic to chat about dark skies. And again, there's a whole festival dedicated to this stuff, and I could talk about it for hours. I think your wealth of knowledge has just been really showcased today. And you're an absolute superstar in yourself, to pardon the pun. So thank you for coming along. To wrap up on the series, this is a series finale. It's part of Climate Action Week. Dark skies obviously linking with climate action really well, but it's also in a really nice lead up to a great time for dark skies. So if you've got a clear night outside, get involved, find your local astronomy club, find your local dark sky ambassador. There is opportunity to get involved as a dark sky ambassador, also a climate ambassador. So check those opportunities out. I want to do a big thank you for the real kind of finish to this. We had the pollinator session for session 1. We had the National Biodiversity Data Centre in for that with Kate Chandler. We had Eleanor Turner, the Biodiversity Officer from Kerry. Then we moved on to bats, and we had Karen Healy from Bat Conservation Ireland speaking about the need for the night sky, actually, just as much as the species themselves. And we were joined there as well by Monica Mullins of Taisce, and also one of our own biodiversity officers specialists there, Ruth Hannafy, on bats as well. We came into Barnells with Birdwatch Ireland, and now Dark Skies to finish it all off. I'd like to say a massive thank you to a huge number of organisations, Taisce and Heritage Council being key there, Waterford County Council for allowing me to be involved. And then to our network of National Biodiversity Data Centre, Bat Conservation Ireland, Birdwatch Ireland, Dark Sky Ireland, and all others who've been involved along the way. To kind of give you an overview of where we're going to go with this. This is a series finale, but it's absolutely not the end of the series itself. We're going to come back in 2025 with a series 2 of Not Stopping Now, because we said we'd lean in to the title and go with it again for next year. For now, if you've got feedback, please let us know what you thought of the series, or if you have any kind of recommendations of who you'd like to see next. And then a couple of dates for your calendar. Saturday the 20th is the Climate Cabaret and Sugar Club, if you're up in Dublin. If you want to head west, we've got the Dark Sky Festival from the 1st to the 3rd of November. I think there's a good crew heading up this year, so we might see you there. The Climate Ambassador applications are open, as Mariana mentioned at the beginning. And I just want to say thank you all for attending. All of these webinars will be available on the Climate Ambassador YouTube channel, and you can watch them back and get all that information again. So thanks, folks. We'll close out there, and we'll see you next year.
Thanks, Marina.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.